So this week, as we take a look at how we look at art, let's ask a bigger question. What is art? What makes something a work of art? And this is a pretty broad question with many answers, really depending upon the point of view of the viewer and the artist. The word art doesn't appear in every language, yet every culture creates some kind of art. The origin of the word art is from a Latin word, ars, which means manual skill. But isn't a work of art more than the result of simple dexterity? Or is it? Since it's really too big an issue to look at what is art, why don't we say, instead, what is a painting? Okay, a painting can be a picture of something or not. There's that idea that if it looks real, it's good art, and hopefully we can kind of move past that idea. Even if someone has a preference for realism, there's so many different ways of creating strong art. So a painting is a picture of something. It's also a layer of pigments on a surface. And this is a notion that's really important in our study of art, because if we move past the idea that art has to look real, we can consider that it's simply substance put on a surface in a way to create a pattern that we either recognize or relate to, or don't. Now, a painting is also a projection of the person who painted it. You can have 5 artists in a room, all painting exactly the same figure or still life, and each one will be very different. So one of the beautiful and mysterious things about art is that we're seeing something of the maker, even if this art was created 1,000 or 10,000 years ago. Now, art is also a reflection of the age or culture that produced it. That's something that we're going to explore in depth, because much of the art that we'll look at this semester provides a window into the age or culture that produced it. So now that we've looked at what art is, I want to look at what a painting is not. So this particular painting is not fruit and vegetables arranged in an interesting composition on a windowsill. Instead, this artist has arranged all these layers of color, which would be probably, in his case, they would be ground with a pumice stone, mixed with something like linseed oil into a paste, and then painted on this surface. And he's done that in such a way to represent to us fruit on a windowsill. Now, this is an extraordinary painting for its time, because people didn't make still lifes in 1602. He did, this guy did, and also there was no photography. So consider that cantaloupe sitting on the windowsill and the many, many hours that it would take to make this painting. So as we go forward, I invite you to consider art as a representation of objects, but to move past the idea that if it looks real, it's better art. These are line drawings by the artist Leonardo da Vinci, and I want you to just blank out your mind and look at each one of them and see what it makes you think of. This can sort of exemplify how art brings up an emotional response simply by its very nature, automatically. Now, consider these images. If you knew that the image on the left was a design for an ancient Japanese egg-carrying basket, would that change the way you looked at it? And what about the image on the top right? A lot of times, students don't know what this is. So here's my question for you. What is it? Don't read if you can see this. It's a green pepper by the great photographer Edward Weston. And what Edward Weston did was he presented his subjects that were quite ordinary objects or parts of the human form, but he would present them in ways that made them appear abstract. Now, look at the bottom image on the right. What if you came from a completely different figure, a completely different culture, and you had never heard the notion of a fork in the road? This would be completely nonsensical. It would make no sense. But because we see fork in the road as a fork in the road, there's a little bit of humor here and a little bit of play on words. Now, here's a painting known as Whistler's Mother. It's by the American artist James Whistler. And if you look at it just casually, maybe some of us have seen this. It's a nice picture of a woman, his mother. You know, it makes us think of America and apple pie and all that. But I'm going to tell you something about this image that's going to change it completely for you. First off, it's not his mother. It's a paid model, and he called it Arrangement in Gray and Black. Now, James Whistler actually loved to paint abstractions. He did some beautiful abstract paintings. But for this work, he is simply exploring gray and black. I want you to notice a few things about the image as I adjust this so you can see it. Oh, it didn't work. So look at this right here. On the right, you can see that there's this little bit of a picture frame that's coming into the main picture as a whole. That's planned. That is not an accident. It breaks up the edge of the picture in a way that makes it more interesting. Also, look at how her feet are on the block, and that block is a little bit lighter. Notice the placement of the other picture and the pattern on the curtains. These are all very intentional. So one of the things, James Whistler never accepted the name Whistler's Mother. So if we consider that an artist is trying to get us to respond in a certain way, this might not be a successful painting. But if you look at it from the point of view that the artist was doing a study in gray and black, and that is pretty successful, and that it has gone on to sort of represent Americana, then in that way it's a successful painting also. So as we can see here, how we view art and how we perceive an image is varied depending on our background, or how close we are, or how to the artist, or how much knowledge we have about a painting. Often students will critique works in my class by a relative or a friend, and in addition to perhaps being a great work of art, the students will have a connection with the artist, which even strengthens their response. Now we're going to look at 4 images of women. Each one represents a different style or a different way of expressing art. Now, this is by the artist Ingres, and he's Jean-Auguste Ingres. It looks like Ingres, I-N-G-R-E, but that's his name, Ingres. And he was a famous portrait artist of the 17th and 18th centuries. Now, what you see here is really not much about the soul of the woman. I mean, you could say, well, this is what an upper-class French woman looked like. But really, he's just kind of showing us her looking nice. And I would bet that he made her neck a little longer, her hands a bit more graceful, her skin a bit more fair, in order to express, to please his client, really. But we don't see much more about the woman. So now we're going to look at a painting by Renoir. And Renoir had a different view of women. While we looked at Ingres, Ingres was a professional portrait painter who would be there to please his clients. But this artist, Renoir, who painted during the Impressionists, he thought of women from that idealized vantage point of sort of the Earth Mother female form. He really put women on a pedestal, and unfortunately he didn't think they could be artists. Women were there for a few things and to be nice and fun to look at, really, according to Renoir. Now, I've forgiven him for this because he's a great artist. But notice this kind of a dancing light in his paintings. All of his paintings have this nature, this quality of a sort of a radiant light emanating in and around the subject. Now, this is intentional. This is how he painted. But it's so different than Madame Leblanc here, or this vibrant woman painted by Renoir. Now, here's a friend of Renoir's, Degas, Edgar Degas, who is actually one of my favorite painters. And this is among my favorite paintings because Renoir broke the rules of composition with this one. Notice how she's looking off the picture plane. There's a huge thing of flowers right in the middle. But somehow this painting works. You would want to have usually your subject more in the middle, a little bit more in the middle, and definitely looking into the picture. but because of the placement of the elbow, the gloves on the left side of the table, the picture, the way the table sort of goes, it leaves that triangle on the left side, all of these elements come together very intentionally to make a very interesting work of art. Now this last one is the Mona Lisa, and what can I say? This has become so popular that we really we can't look at it without, with any objectivity. So, which is more beautiful? Here we have these different images from different societies. The one in the upper left corner really is endearing as he's setting up the portrait painter. But the one below it of the woman in the tribal dress, if you were from her tribe, she would probably be a total knockout. But from our culture, maybe we don't understand it. And then we have a very famous Venus by Botticelli on the bottom, and then a woman with her hands painted in henna, which is traditional in other cultures, which would be, again, beautiful within her own tradition. Now, every day we are bombarded with images. 3,500 images, some people say, in a day. So how in the world are we going to appreciate just one? What I'd like to ask you to do is to just notice your automatic responses. Now I'm showing you the hamburger because let's say you're a vegetarian and you're an animal rights activist. You would go, oh, this is disgusting. Let's say you love a good juicy burger and it's lunchtime. This makes me hungry. Or let's say you're from the mountains of Peru and you've never seen a hamburger. Then this means nothing to you. So much of our seeing and understanding comes from our perspective. Now, if you know this, then you can widen your perspective and look at automatic responses and see how you can change those in order to further your understanding. That's what I want to do with the art that we look at in this class. Now, this is one by Picasso. It's called The Bull's Head by Pablo Picasso. Now, you might notice that it is a bicycle seat and handlebars. Now, many people might walk by a bicycle and say, wow, if I put the handlebars on the seat, that might look like a bull's head. Who would do it? That's the difference between those that are successful in the arts and those that are kind of wannabe. When one has a creative idea, even if it's just outlandish like this, some people will go ahead and do it, and some people will kind of move on. And both ways are okay. But I encourage you to explore the possibility of following up on creative ideas, because as we do that, then we open, everybody else gets to see our creative endeavors also. So I'm going to just show you a couple of images. Here's another one by Picasso. And this is an image called First Steps. With this image, what he's doing is he's showing this woman releasing her child in the first steps. Now you might look at this and go, wow, that's a weird painting. Look, everything's crooked, it's all off center. But consider that this child is kind of walking in the herky-jerky fashion, and the woman is letting go of this being that's still connected to her own body. And in the image, he's sort of still, or the child is sort of still melting into the woman as it heads out into the world. Now, lastly, it seems obvious that our view of a work of art changes as we learn more about it. That's part of what makes studying art so interesting. Unlike other subjects, there's often no right answer, no rules to say what is good or bad. But as we further our study of art and as we learn to widen our viewpoint, to move past our automatic responses, then we are able to understand more deeply and probably appreciate more. If we look at that upper right image, that's an artist named William McNamara. You might think it's a photograph. Nope, it's a watercolor painting. Or if you look at the lower right, that's by a man named Marcel Duchamp. You might think Mona Lisa with a mustache. What was he thinking? Well, he was a rebellious artist who had been through World War I, had been quite traumatized. And so he came out of World War I and thumbed his nose at the art establishment. This artist created a movement called Dada, which is really a bunch of young rebels. And then the other two, well, one of them is very odd, and the other one is money. So anyway, 15 minutes is up. Slideshow's over. Thanks for listening.